Good afternoon and thank you for joining us. My name is Talusha Kalani and I am Assistant Commissioner in BBC Comedy Commissioning. And I've been doing that since February, and before that I worked in BBC production. I worked on a BBC Two, I produced a BBC Two Paul Whitehouse series called Nurse, and for a long time I was in radio comedy where I worked on shows like Just a Minute and Chain Reaction and lots of sitcoms and panel games and all sorts. So that's who I am, and let me briefly introduce our guest, Lucy Lumsden. Lucy...
no, it's nearly an applause.
There was
slightly applause.
I will let you applaud while I gather my thoughts. Thank you. What a lovely audience.
Turn into a stand-up. That's a really bad way to start. I'm not a stand-up comic.
Lucy Lumsden's presided over some of the most iconic comedies in British television. She's been a commissioner at the BBC and then at Sky, head of comedy commissioning, and she's recently decided to do what some of us in commissioning dream about, which is to go back into production, go back to the coalface, and so we'll be asking her about that too, having done her final productions at Sky. And now I'll ask her for a formal applause. Please welcome Lucy Lumsden.
Oh, again. Okay.
And then I feel I can start. And I will also ask you to, if you have questions at any point during this session, because this is to make it as useful to you guys as we possibly can, please raise your hands and I'll keep an eye out and I will field your questions to Lucy. But let me get in with the first one, and I will ask Lucy by asking, how did you get into the business?
Okay, first step, I suppose, seeds were sown at university. I think, like a lot of people, kind of finding your way by not working at what you should be doing at the university. So I had my degree going there, but the fun bit was happening at the student theatre. So I went to Edinburgh University, and they have a great student theatre called Bedlam Theatre, which is still going strong today. And that was also a venue during the Fringe. So there we were, students kind of figuring out what the hell we were doing. But during the summer holidays, suddenly all these people were coming to Edinburgh, university town, and kind of sort of aware of this growing area of comedy. And I think that's where I sort of started to fall in love with the genre, this very odd genre. And then I suppose the weird thing was thinking you could actually get a career in it. I really didn't think I would, and left university thinking I should get a proper job. I was very lucky to get a job at the comic strip, and that was where Dawn French, Jennifer Saunders, Adrian Eberson, Rick Mell, Nigel Planer, under the guise of Peter Richardson, they had this very iconic series that launched on Channel 4 and went to the BBC. So that was my first step, and I was very lucky to get it.
Lucy, you said you sort of slid into comedy on the side of your degree. What was your degree in? Did you?
History of art,
right,
the posh Sloaney degree that absolutely is utterly worthless.
Has it come in use at all at any point?
Not at all, not at all. But it gave me 4 amazing years at university.
And what did you do after comic strip? What was the...
So comic strip was 2 years. I worked with Naira Park, who is a very famous producer. She does all of Edgar Wright's films. I think she's sort of one of the leading comedy producers we have in the UK. And Naira's only a year older than me, but my God, she was a taskmaster, and she really taught me about, it was just like a sort of military operation making TV. You were working in the best bloody business you could imagine, but you had to treat it incredibly seriously. So I really learned that I could, pretend to swan around with an MA from Edinburgh. It counted for nothing. It was about making a good cup of tea, going out to get sandwiches for the writers upstairs, doing anything that you were asked to do, and doing it really well. And I have to say, that's the 2 years of the comic strip, was just proving that I was indispensable.
Fantastic.
So I haven't answered your question, which is what happened after that. I then learned to be very good at doing lots of odd jobs, which is great getting very good at things like becoming a wardrobe assistant. It got me on to An Evening with Gary Lineker, which was a special that Granada were making. So I spent a month in Ibiza with Martin Clunes, Caroline Quentin, Paul Merton, Clive Owen, pretending to be a wardrobe assistant. I really didn't have a clue what I was doing. And that's the other thing, be resourceful. I mean, I slightly was cheating my way through it, but along the way, I was on set, day in, day out, watching what everybody else was doing. It wasn't about becoming a costume designer. I knew that that wasn't it. But I used that moment where Janty Yates, now I think Oscar winner, asked me, because she'd met me through comic strip. She knew, I mean, I think that's the thing. People spot that really good work ethic. And I think Janty saw that if I couldn't sew on a button, I would bloody well show up at 5 in the morning and I'd be there last thing at night. And that's sort of what got me through. And that's my tip is if you get an opportunity, seize it. You don't need to have, learn on the job. Just look as if you know what you're doing. And you'll convince people that you do.
Fabulous. And how did you make the leap from doing these production roles into the more scripted area?
I just felt I did lots of different production things. So again, seized the opportunities. I then went on to do, I was production coordinator, sort of went up that production ladder. I worked on a big drama, which was called Crocodile Shoes. This was years ago. I can't remember the year, 95 maybe. I felt it was quite interesting. I could do the day-to-day nuts and bolts of production, but I was always leaning towards the script, really wanting to know how the script was written, and I sort of was fascinated by scripts. So through that role, again, it wasn't the role I was going to end up doing. I got to sort of realise what I was interested in and what I wasn't interested in, and scripts was the thing. I left Crocodile Shoes. I'm afraid to say I walked out of that job. I haven't done this before, but I didn't like the way the show was being run. I thought I would never work in TV again. Luckily, Linda James, who was the executive producer, who I thought when she called me into her office would absolutely bollock me, said, "I like your style, come and work for me." So it was like this day where I thought, I'm either going to go this way or I'm going to go that way. And amazingly, there was a job going in comedy. And it was to develop comedies for Red Rooster Productions, part of the Chrysalis group at the time. So I stayed there for 2 years, and that's where I really, really got to grips with scripts, reading them, assessing them, figuring out what made something funny, and just dealing with writers, actually, direct rapport with writers. The beginnings of the really difficult thing, which is giving notes, and how you give notes without being told to bugger off.
That's always a learning curve, isn't it? That never kind of goes away during your whole time in commissioning, because partly giving notes is about relationships and the relationship you build with that writer.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating one. And then how did you come into BBC commissioning?
So BBC, I temped. So this is where I've used every single skill under the book, and I could type really fast. This is pre, things not needing to be typed up quite the way they are. And I temped for a bit, and again, jobs came available. You keep your eyes open, your ears open. I didn't go through the sort of pool. There used to be various sort of work streams that were very clearly defined at the BBC. I got in through this group called the Independent Commissioning Group, which was a really interesting part of the BBC that was looking out, not in-house. It was looking out to the explosion of the independent sector, which is now really normal. But at the time, which was about 1999, the BBC was really majority of all that comedy was made in-house. So this was the beginning of Tiger Aspect, Talkback Productions, Baby Cow Productions, Hat Trick. Now there are many, many independent companies out there, but it was a growing area. And in fact, it was the bit of the BBC that turned into the bit you work in today, which is genre commissioning. So I was right place, right time.
Fabulous. And then I'd like to talk to you about specific commissions, but before we go on to that, what do you think makes for a good commissioning editor? I mean, I'd like to know as well as pass the knowledge on.
Okay, breadth of knowledge, really knowing your subject very well. You are dealing with producers who know a lot more than you, but you're a temporary custodian to what the broadcaster is looking for at the time. You won't be there forever, so you have to make your mark, but crucially not commission just your mates to kind of give them a job. You've got a very valuable job, which is you are spending a broadcaster's money on something the audience behind you might like, not you. You have to sort of put your personal taste slightly to one side. It's a very easy thing to say, it's quite a hard thing to do. by the same token, you can't second guess. If you feel you're second guessing too much, you're losing your gut feel. So that really tricky balance between personal taste, gut feel, custodian to the audience, is sort of constant balancing act. Knowing the brief, really knowing what your channel is after, what will fit, where will... I think I was really taught very early on by Danielle Lux, who now runs CPL, she was my boss for a time. She said, where will this play? Who's this for? And even though you go, I love it, where will it play? Who's it for? And they really narrow down sort of where you're going to focus your attention and make sure that you're not raising hopes of a writer in order for later on not be able to answer where will it play and who's it for. And that can be a 2-year lengthy, boring development process, and you haven't answered those two really key questions. Apart from the fact, is it funny? But I think there's another thing of really brutal, does it fit?
Does it fit? Wonderful. Yeah. Can you tell us about the first show you were involved with when you were...
The BBC?
Yes.
The very first show was Human Remains, which people might not know that well, but it's quite an interesting one where it was from Julia Davis and Rob Brydon, who collaborated. It was a Baby Cow production. It was very, very early days for Baby Cow. It was obviously Steve Coogan's company with Henry Normal. It was a show that was very black humour. It was about couples. It was very caustic. It was very BBC Two. It was a very interesting one where I learned a real lesson that I hadn't kept Jane Root, the channel controller at the time, fully across the tone of this show. So once she'd read a script, she got something in her head. Then it was made, and then it was delivered back to her, and it wasn't what she'd imagined it would be, and she was really disappointed in that first glimpse of it. It was because it was a very new flavour. It was dark humour. Luckily, we kind of stuck to our guns and thought, this is a very particular taste of comedy. We're not going to change the show. We're going to put it out and let the audience be the judge. And thankfully, Jane Root, who was brilliant at the time, The Office came under Jane Root's time, as well as many other brilliant comedies. She didn't make us change it, but it wasn't to her taste. Now, the lesson I learned, and I think is a lesson all the way through this TV process, which is all about collaboration and communication, making sure that what you have said is blue is going to be the version of blue over the other side to that person. You keep them informed all along the way. No one likes shocks and surprises, especially when shows cost about 2.5 million quid. So you have to really be sure that everyone's with you on the plan. It's a difficult job as it is, but that was my lesson learned on that particular show.
It's a beautiful series. I'm a huge fan of it.
Yeah.
Before we move on to discussing another favourite of mine, Outnumbered, does anybody have any questions at this point? Come on, should we get one in and then we've got started? Not yet? Okay, let's talk a little bit about Outnumbered. Can you tell me? Shall we see a clip of it first? Actually, let's see a clip.
Okay.
Daddy,
Oh, hello.
where's my other shoe?
Oh, I don't know. Where did you put it? Can you remember?
No. What's a hypocrite?
Well, if, for example, I'd said you mustn't eat all the cake, and then I ate all the cake myself, then I'd be a hypocrite.
What's a twat? Twat.
It's not a very nice word for children to use, really. Where did you hear that? You've been watching Trisha or something?
No, last night when you were arguing with Mum.
Yeah, well, mummies and daddies do argue sometimes, don't they? You shout sometimes, don't you? Did you hear any other words?
There were some other words that I heard, but I just can't remember them.
Good.
Something about midlife. Something about Pellick. And there's Pellick and another word. I think it's punk. And there was one, and it was tight bum.
Right, well, probably best not to use those too often. Why don't you go off and find your shoe? What was all that about?
Look, I'm really sorry about last night. It was just,
No, it was me. It was me.
No,
because I hadn't really thought it through properly.
well, that's
I
true,
hadn't.
but it was me.
No, it was
a lot.
me. It was me. It's usually me.
Well,
it was mostly me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was me.
Tight bum.
Honk.
Down! It's for show and tell.
It is not for show and tell, because you could hurt someone with that.
That's a fantastic show. I love when Claire Skinner does this.
I know, it's great,
Such
isn't
a
it?
little bit of
It's like
nice detail
avoiding the issue.
and a good example of what actors bring to the table once the script is there. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how Outnumbered was pitched to you.
Yeah, Outnumbered was really interesting, and Andy Hamilton and Guy Jenkin, obviously behind Drop the Dead Donkey, as well as many other shows. The holy grail, and it continues to be for all mainstream broadcasters, is the family comedy. I certainly laugh because you have so many pitches for the family comedy. They came up with a really measly little piece of paper that said a funny family comedy. Trust us. The differences will have real kids, shot in documentary style. And you've probably heard a lot about treatments. That was the treatment. Kind of like, wow. But, Andy and Guy had earned their stripes by that point. So this is a key thing, is once you get to that moment in your career, if you're going to take a chance on someone, even the audacity of having such a thin treatment, you sort of think, well, this is really going to be worth a punt. Funnily enough, Jimmy Mulville, who runs Hat Trick, who's the executive producer, he was as impressed by that flimsy piece of paper as I was. And we kind of looked at each other, and this is the thing about what do you do as a development process when you've got that little to go on. That's a very improvised show, and so the script was never going to be the thing that we could judge it by. So the obvious thing to do was to commission a taster tape. So I think I put in 10 grand, Jimmy put in 10 grand. We shared the risk in a way. And because Jimmy needed convincing, and so did I. And the key thing was, if you find the kids, you've got a show. If you can't find the kids to do that, then there was very little to go on. We could have Hugh and Claire brilliantly talking to each other, but obviously the show really comes from what was so fresh about having kids, hadn't come out of drama school, weren't, chiseled and perfectly formed. They were like real kids. So that taster tape won us over within about 10 seconds. So it was 20K between us, very well spent. And away they went. And it's a difficult show to make. Obviously, you're very restricted with hours, and I won't bore you with all of that. But Andy and Guy, based on their own family experiences, very authored. I'm a big believer in authorship in comedy. I think it's where our British comedy excels. And based on their family lives, Andy's got umpteen children. All that truth, the truth you get from documentary making, put into comedy, and out on BBC One as well, not BBC Two, but BBC One. Admittedly, in a late slot at the beginning, which is a bit of a habit of BBC One, but then they realised what they had, which was actually a mainstream pre-Watershed show, not post-Watershed show.
Fabulous. And wasn't that a show that they kind of put out daily? Wasn't that sort of an unusual...
No, bedtime was that.
Bedtime.
So the show, the commission before that was bedtime,
Right.
which went out the same slot every night because
Yes.
it was that half hour in real time of those couples.
Ah, I knew there was something around there. And how did you, because without the script there to reassure the channel, how did you reassure the channel about what
Because
you was...
That taster
That
tape.
taster tape.
So that's the thing, and I think there's a real sort of mystery around how do things get made. The Outnumbered, you have to look at what is the absolutely central comic idea that's going to make that shine, and that was those kids, and making sure. And we'll talk about Moon Boy later, which is exactly the same. It's really where casting just felt like 75% of what that show's about. The rest, I sort of feel that's going to come. They're good writers. They know what they're doing. I mean, Andy and Guy, they probably wouldn't have gone ahead if they hadn't found the kids either. So that was it. You have a taste tape, brilliant piece of ammo taped to the channel controller at the time. And it's just one of those brilliant eureka moments that every commissioner wants. No-brainer moments. You don't even have to persuade anybody. It is just so clear to see that it's deserving of a series. And they're great when they come, those moments, but not very often.
Fantastic. That show is just, I think it breathes new life into kind of comedy at the time.
Yeah.
Because the improvised dialogue really added a new sort of texture and grain to comedy.
Yeah.
That was going out, especially, was it around 2007? Yes, it was.
Yeah, I can't remember the year, but interestingly, my family was still going out at the time, and the two were really compared. And my family came to an end a few years later. And Outnumbered and My Family, the audience sitcom, compared to this very, indie style that The Office really had established. Before that, People Like Us, if you want to go back into mock doc territory. Before that, Spinal Tap. But it was really interesting time. BBC One had these two really different shows on at the same time, very different tone. And they were both coming together in this sort of mainstream middle, but very, very different points of view on how to deliver family life in a funny way. Yeah.
Fabulous. And let's go from something that was a very writer-led commission to something that's very writer-performer-led, talent-led, as people in the industry might say. So can we see a clip of Miranda, please?
Hello to you and thanks for joining. This is exciting, isn't it? Eh? Now, so let me get you up to speed. Previously in my life, my mother tried to marry me off.
Someone, please marry my daughter. I'm not asking for money. I'm literally giving her away.
She was upset because I just told her how I blew my inheritance. I bought a joke shop. No, I love it, although I am worried that hiring my oldest friend to manage it was a mistake.
And that is how we will take this franchise global.
It's a bit much, isn't it? I mean, we're just a little shop that sells.
Shut and submit.
And today I'm overexcited because apparently Gary Preston's back from his travels. He's lovely. But I always make a cock-up if I see him. Well, there's never any cock-up involved, if you see what I mean. Oh, how naughty! Oh, but the last time I saw him...
Come on, we've got to dance to this one.
Okay. We'll speak no more of, and let's crack on with the show.
Wow. Great seeing that again. My God.
Fabulous. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions about at this point? Is that the lovely blonde lady in the front, in the middle here?
Hiya.
Hi.
How many pictures will you have to look at before you find one that you really want to commission? And also, what do you look at that will interest you? Like, what will you pick out of all the others that interest you?
How many pictures? A lot. I've never counted it up. It's just a very, very busy week all the time, and there's a reading pile you never get to the bottom of. So it's constant. Pitches for comedy really are scripts, because I've had treatments, but set in a, I don't know, football club or set in a supermarket, and that is really impossible to judge. I think you'll probably hear this from any comedy commissioner, is that they won't be able to judge a treatment. So when you say pitch, it's going to be that script as well. So script is all about dialogue, and the dialogue is really, unlike the Outnumbered thing where we went, okay, it's got to be something else, visual thing to bring it to life. But the script is everything. So how do you choose? Is that the question? I mean, the first thing is going to be the obvious thing. Does it make me laugh? But not just me. I always love working with a team. I have about 4, 5, 6 people. So if I chuckle, we pass it around. There's a really basic things that sort of, does it hold together? Is it the right number of pages? Does this writer know who they're pitching for? I think a lot of scripts can fall at the first hurdle, where the basic homework of, where if you were sitting on my side of the desk, help me out, help me see where this is going to head. We're all viewers. We're all trying to kind of figure out what we want to watch and why. And then know your comedy, know how to construct a joke, know how to not have a scene be too long, know how a number of characters can hold your attention. There are sort of some basic areas of the craft that you're judging, and if you can feel that person isn't ready, then that's going to get a rejection very, very early on. I'm afraid it's fairly brutal. But you've got to remember we're the commissioning level, so a script should have gone through a few phases on a sort of producer level, where a producer with very good experience would have honed this idea to a sort of state where it's absolutely ready to be commissioned. So it's a very long-winded answer, but I think it is, and there are really good resources, many more resources out there now than there used to be, about how to get a script ready. But we should talk about Miranda, shouldn't we?
We should, yes. Let's move on to Miranda.
Miranda's fascinating, and this is quite well documented, and she's written a fabulous book about it. But I was very lucky at my time at the BBC that Miranda Hart was young, new talent that was emerging. And it wasn't just me who spotted her, I can guarantee it. John Plowman, French and Saunders were very early fans of Miranda. In a way, it was Miranda who needed to realise that she had a show in her, because everybody else knew, but she needed just time. And she did a very clever thing, which was to write her show and to put it on radio first. And in fact, she did her pilot for the TV and knew she hadn't quite got it back. Frustrating for us, because we were like, where's the series? It's so good. She went back to radio and really, talk about, getting your craft right. She went back and she went honed and honed and honed. A few changes we made to that pilot. I'm cutting ahead, but there's someone who worked very hard. She worked with a number of writers, learned how to write a sitcom, in her own show. That's not easy. Putting herself at the heart of it and making it semi-autobiographical as well, which is, I think, why it does that Bridget Jones' Diary thing. If you just think, oh, so thank God it's not me. But she was great, Miranda. Joe Sargent, I should credit as a producer within the BBC who was such a passionate advocate for her. She was in Hyperdrive, very early science fiction comedy from, can't remember when, Nick Frost was in it. Miranda first appeared there, I think, and then Not Going Out had started with Lee Mack, and if you remember the early days, who was that cleaner? It was Miranda Hart. And so she was cleaner for series 1. She was too funny. So she found the confidence. I think that was really it, confidence to do her own show. And my God, weren't we lucky? So it started on BBC Two, if you remember, pre-Watershed. It was a brand new slot. And I'm kind of glad. It was a really interesting slot for her to feel quite secure. She didn't want to be on BBC One. I should check with her, but I don't think she did. She wanted to launch it carefully. It was a very sensible thing to do. Thinking if it launched in that bright spotlight of BBC One, it would possibly have burnt out too early. It grew, she grew, and then it just sort of did that wonderful thing that when it happens, it's delicious, that meteoric rise, and then she was the one that everyone was talking about that year, which has got to persuade her to do more.
How did the sort of unique device of well, I know it's been done before, but it was quite fresh at the time of Miranda talking to the audience directly come about?
So I think you'd have to ask her, but that was really in the radio show. So if you think about it, it was a very talky show. It was very dialogue driven, and she did a really brave thing of just going, sod it. It worked on the radio. She said, "Hi, I'm Miranda. Welcome to my show," and tried it, and it really worked. And it could have not worked at all, but it's what gave it that bookending. Mrs. Brown's Boys does it all the time now, but you sort of look for. Some people say Miranda. I remember having arguments with people saying I was desperately old-fashioned. really hard to do this stuff now. And I think it was a device that set it apart from being just another audience sitcom. That direct rapport with the audience was what that show needed, and it worked.
But it's interesting that having done it on the radio gave her the confidence to know it could work on television.
Yeah, and the
to help
radio
persuade
is
others.
Brilliant training ground still for comedy.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Any other questions at this point? The gentleman at the back with his hand up really high.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What makes a good comedy script in a commissioner's eyes, in the first place? And the second question, what is vulgar and what is taboo in a comedy program? Thank you.
So good comedy script. This is, I mean, comedy is subjective, so it's a really tricky one. I think, I always think I'm a commissioner on behalf of the audience. So you have a subjective taste to something, but and there are certain shows I don't like but are commissioned. You know, you have to think, what has got a consistent number of gags that are working? What is missing as well? What is missing as in, this is a voice I haven't heard for a while, so we'll talk about Mrs. Brown's Boys, but that was a voice we hadn't heard for a while. I think there's a freshness, so we might see a clip of Trolleyed, which is set in a supermarket. Freshness in terms of, I know this world so well in normal real life, but I haven't seen it on TV before. So there's all the craft we've talked about, getting that honed. But there's always something in comedy that you didn't see it coming. And you didn't see it coming around it being a family comedy delivered in a fresh way with Outnumbered, an office world that you've never seen delivered before by this idiot called David Brent in the middle of the office, you know, managing badly. The other thing that we haven't talked about at all is characters. So well-drawn characters from the blooming Greeks when they were starting comedy, those archetypes, recognition, relating to a voice, a world, caring, and then joke construction. So sprinkling all of this delicious sort of combination of characters, a setting, something that's fresh, something that's relevant to you, with jokes that build over time, and if it's a sitcom, something that rewards you by the end, resets itself, and you can't wait to see what they do next week. I mean, I've really done a potted history of what makes good comedy, but it's, and there are brilliant books out there which I would highly recommend. James Carey is someone who does a brilliant writer's blog. As a writer who goes through the process of writing, rejection, coming back with a new script, working on a successful show. James worked on Miranda. I really recommend hearing from a writer, maybe not a commissioner so much. I often see the finished product, but seeing someone who goes through so many stages of getting something from good to great.
I think the blog is called Sitcom Geek, if I remember rightly. He also co-wrote Bluestone 42 recently. And just to add to that, from it's different at different stages what makes a good comedy. I think from the commissioning editor perspective, as Lucy sort of outlined, sometimes it's a case of really listening to what that channel needs, really being aware of that. And I think a time when that worked out for me was when I worked at Radio Comedy, and the head of Radio 4 was sort of saying, sometimes we have a really grown-up station here with lots of expertise on the airwaves, and sometimes at 6:30 the comedy comes on and it's young men in their 20s goofing about doing sketches, and just occasionally that tonal shift is too much. And so to really hear that and develop something that felt a little bit more grown up for that slot worked out really well in my favor at that point. So being aware of the business need from that point of view. But I think when you're starting out, the best way is to really listen to the writer's perspective. I think you're completely right. Whatever role you are in, because they're the people you're going to be communicating with, and they're the people whose vision you're helping to bring onto the screen or onto the radio.
Vulgar and taboo. Let me think about this. I mean, taboos are, I think, the unmentionables, aren't they? They're where we fear to tread, and where comedy is the genre to do it where we can, but do it judiciously is my feeling. And taboos are always changing, because what's a taboo last year will be a different taboo. And I suppose, I don't quite know the question, but I'm a real believer in, that's why I love someone like Julia Davis, is comedy is a place where if you can find humour in something and do it sensitively but cleverly, it's a really important thing for us culturally to make things that are unsayable, sayable. What other genre can you do it in? So if you can sort of chip away at a taboo and do it in a witty, intelligent way. The thing that annoyed me as a commissioner sometimes was a sort of slightly blunt use of sometimes language to get a cheap laugh or make a cheap point about a really sensitive subject. And they aren't great, those ones. They're tricky and, you know, big defender of writers saying what they want to say, but we have a thing called compliance, and it's there for a reason. At the BBC, you're paid for by the public. You have to respond and be responsible as a broadcaster. But I love the line, and the line is ever-changing, and so it should. But I love the line between tasteful and distasteful. It's a very important one in comedy. Need to keep pushing it, and I don't think we push it enough.
It is, and I think sometimes that line is glibness, and the glibness of approach can make people feel very upset and riled. And I think sometimes when a subject, no matter how taboo, is explored properly and with a degree of sensitivity, then it can be...
Or just it's funny enough. I mean, that was a very basic thing, is it funny enough to justify the offence it's going to cause? That's a really interesting question. You get half the room totally disagreeing with you. But if you can believe in that and hold your ground as a commissioner, and I had to do this quite a lot on things like a lot of the Stuart Murphy commissions, if anyone knows Stuart, got a very mischievous sense of humour. So as he was channel controller of BBC Three at the time, constantly pushing boundaries was vital for that channel. It is a great shame it's not going to exist anymore, because it's a really important space for expression in this country. Sorry, but it is. So yeah, shows like Monkey Dust from Harry Thompson, who sadly no longer with us, one of the most satirical, brilliant brains in the country. It was an animation, so that was a nightmare. To sign off the scripts 2 years before the thing shows up, and taboos had shifted in that time. Things that were unacceptable were acceptable, and vice versa. So there were very few changes we can make. It's really worth seeing Monkey Dust, because my God, they pushed the boundaries. And Harry predicted all sorts of extraordinary things in that show. He was a really incredible mind.
Fabulous. I'm going to move on to your time at Sky. And
What's next? What's our next clip?
I'd say Hunderby. Let's start with Hunderby.
Our tale begins in the year of our Lord 1831. When the Bethany Rose wrecked off Binglesbeck Beach in the small hamlet of Hunderby. 91 souls were lost that night. Our heroine was a stowaway, carried to shore by another survivor, a noble blackamoor, Jeff.
Filthy beast, trying to eat a dead girl. He's stealing a locket.
Fellows of such a hue were not common in Hunderby, and thinking her dead, Jeff fled, taking her locket with him. Our heroine would indeed have perished had it not been for the arrival of Dr. Fogarty, a sturdy man just shy of his middle years.
Dear God, is there no one left alive?
Fogarty on swift hands rushed to her side, gathered her up, and deftly did he blow the lass to life. How different might our tale have been had the widowed pastor not appeared.
Make way, this is God's work. Please, sir, I am the physician. In the name of our Lord, Christ Jesus, let this wretched soul be saved. Well.
Hunderby.
A fabulous show and such a fantastic cast too.
It was amazing.
Yeah. So please tell us about how that came about.
So Hunderby, are people familiar with Julia Davis's work? So Human Remains, kind of interesting when you progress plot your time as commissioner. First show I was involved in, and this is a recent show, and the special comes out this Christmas. So this was about the third show I'd worked with Julia Davis on, and I think this is a really key thing. It doesn't matter whether you're interested in comedy, but partnerships, you possibly heard that throughout the afternoon. Partnerships in all your work are really key. Creative partnerships, if you think about partnerships between producers and directors, one comedy writer and another comedy writer, particular writers and particular performers. You see it a lot through the creative process, but you see it a lot in comedy. And Julia has worked brilliantly with Baby Cow, so that's Steve Coogan, Henry Normal's company. And I suppose we all had this strange sense of humour that requires, you pitch something like Hunderby, there's a bit of a sharp intake of breath. Not everybody's going to love it. It's certainly not BBC One, that's for sure. You've got to sort of tune into this type of humour, which is dark and twisted and Julia Davis-ish. So Hunderby probably came out of growing a relationship across a number of other shows. And then when you go to Sky, and Sky had a lot of money that they'd poured into production, thank God, and poured into comedy, you sort of go to Julia and go, what's your biggest idea? And this was her biggest idea, really because it's a parody of a very expensive form of television, which is period drama. I mean, her influences were Daphne du Maurier and Rebecca and those sorts of films. So and writer. So unless you get your parody right, if you get your source material, the thing that you're parodying absolutely right, and you do that justice, and you give it a flipping crane shot that costs a fortune, and you put them on a beach, and you have a shipwreck behind, you're not going to land that joke. And so that was the thing that Stuart Murphy, who worked at BBC Three, when he went to Sky, I followed him there. We enjoyed allowing a lot of the people we'd worked with at the BBC to play in a slightly bigger box of toys, and that's how Hunderby came about. And I'm delighted that it picked up a whole heap of awards, and I think, Nighty Night's really good as well, but I think this is my favourite thing that Julia's done. So yes, trusting a writer like Julia, a writer-performer, she'd earned her stripes in order to kind of get her moment to do Hunderby. I mean, the next thing she should do is a feature film, I think. But
if you haven't seen it, do check it out. It's wonderfully bold and kind of pushes comedy into a new area. Yeah, the amazing cast. So casting is such a key part of making a comedy, especially like built comedy in front of an audience successful. So could you tell, I'm sure some students are interested in casting, could you talk a little bit about that process? And
yeah. There's no exact science. I think the key thing is how you get something made and whether you attach names. We get asked that a lot. It kind of depends on the show. If a character demands a particular level of profile or demands a particular skill that they are leading the show in front of an audience then you zoom in on that character and you sort of go in a really boring broadcasterly way. Who's playing so and so? That's becomes quite key. Moon Boy is who's playing Moon Boy. It's in the title of the show. It's going to be an unknown. Let's make sure they can hold their own. This is the beginning of a very long journey you're about to go on with someone. The other thing is whether this cast are going to fit together. So if it's an ensemble like Trolleyed, are again slightly archetypes, our characters going to sort of add up to look like a family that would work together. It's important that we are reflecting a real world, so that's really important. There are certain projects. If you are Andy Hamilton, Guy Jenkin, I think we're not going to scrutinise who plays mum and dad. We weren't so interested. We kind of knew that Andy and Guy would attract a great cast. If you're a brand new writer, I always see these things as making up a jigsaw puzzle. There needs to be some element of the bit of development you are presenting that is really secure. This is all about making people feel confident in an idea. So there's a really easy way to make people feel very confident, which is have talked to a major cast member quite early on in the process. Because something like Mr. Sloan we did on Sky Atlantic, Bob Whitey, who's an American producer, writer, director, came to the UK, knew he wanted to write a show for Nick Frost. So when he presented the script for Mr. Sloan, it was a Nick Frost vehicle. My goodness, that helps. We know who we're getting. We know who's on the poster. And it was called Mr. Sloan. So you need to know who Mr. Sloan is. So there's no exact science. There's no hard and fast rules about casting. You have to, again, imagine to be the other side of the table as a commissioner. What would you want to be answered in advance of just talking about a nice idea? What are the key component parts that will give the commissioner confidence to know that they're on to a winner? Yeah, castings. Different on each show, but I hope that's helpful.
Any other questions at this stage? A lady over there has a hand.
Hiya, sorry, it's just about commissioning. Would you say commissioning comedy is more challenging than commissioning other genres?
I think that thing of being subjective and taste, I think, comes into play more often than in other genres, because what makes you laugh may not make me laugh. So that's the challenge, and that's the way I really learned to not commission just so that my little family at home would find that hilarious. I have to think about my mother-in-law, I have to think about Stuart's mother, I have to think about, and we would do that as much as we humanly possibly could without being a blooming blob of focus group. Really think for, if it's Sky One and it's going to play at 8 p.m, it's got to appeal to the Modern Family audience, because they're hopefully going to stay with you across that night. So that's one particular taste there. If it's Sky Atlantic and it's just played after Game of Thrones, then Hunderby will be okay, because it's a very particular taste, possibly more discerning end of the audience. So that's that commissioning thing of, it's sort of this midwife role of making sure that you are delivering to that slot what you think will work for that audience. It's quite a strange job when I describe it.
I think it's harder. I think it's definitely harder than other genres. It's basically like working down a mine, but
when you're a producer, this thing about taste, it's quite different. Producer, you're making something I think you're going to watch, and I think you can feel it if a producer's possibly been attached to a show that they don't love, and I've seen that happen. All the delicious organic thing of making great art, whether it's TV or theatre, whatever, if that chain breaks, it's a real shame, and I've seen it in shows. I saw it on a show, I won't name, but a producer had the idea, they gave it to a writer, then they attached a cast member, and I could feel it was a fractured experience, and it hadn't organically grown. It's why I love working with authors like Julia. She comes up with a kernel of an idea, plants the seed, and it grows, and it's so clear in its vision all the way through. Outnumbered, I think, did the same. I think Miranda does the same. I think Mrs. Brown's Boys does the same. And I'm sure there are other comedies that will totally prove me wrong, but I really feel it comes from belief in that original idea. I don't know how committee creating art, I don't know how that works. I think that's really problematic with comedy. You need to have one person who's driving it through.
I think when people talk about comedies that appeal to everyone, it's not a case of making something very general. It can be a very specific world. But as long as that world works within itself, as long as it's integrated, people come to it, don't they? They bring themselves to it. And Moon Boy, which you mentioned briefly, is a really good example of that. I think it's a show that can have a really big popular appeal, though it's about a very specific sort of experiences. Yeah. I don't know, for those of you who might not have seen it, it's created by Chris O'Dowd, who is the lead in IT Crowd, and it's about his childhood experiences in a small Irish town. It's based on that. it came about from a short he did called Little Crackers,
Yeah.
didn't it?
So just to give you a little bit of background to that, when I arrived at Sky are always in a hurry to do things tomorrow. Comedy takes a bit of time. But I came up with Little Crackers. Basically, you could get lots of different people making shorts. Shorts are really handy. They only take up 4 days of a very famous person's time, so you're more likely to get that famous person. Give them the theme of a kind of formative moment in their life, autobiographical tale, something that changed them, but a moment in their life where they felt like you or I, even sort of Stephen Fry at one point was a schoolboy. So it was a very delicious way of getting a big name in there, getting a kind of mini-me cast as their baby selves, or authorship again, but it was short. And it went out at Christmas in 2010. And Chris O'Dowd's was one of those, and we didn't know it then, but it was the beginning of what became a series called Moon Boy.
Shall we show a clip?
Gas, I totally forgot I was your godmother. Sure, probably missed a load of your birthdays.
It's okay. I kept a tab.
Did you have them all there all right? Do you know what name you're taking? Because I checked through a few scenes and I came up with a few suggestions. Aquinas the Baptist, Bonaventure.
Actually, I decided to let Grandad pick my confirmation name.
Oh, that's so sweet, Martin.
I think I'll go for Martin.
Martin?
Oh, Martin's a lovely name.
After Saint Martin.
What did he do again?
Oh, I don't know. He was one of the black ones.
Oh, yeah.
Martin's my name.
That's right. Martin.
Martin. It's easy to remember. Here we go. So exciting.
Mass is so exciting.
Oh, we praise thy name.
Already bored, Martin tuned out. Until suddenly a biblical breeze of coolness blew through the congregation like a boy blizzard. With its own smoke machine. Can't touch this. And their rakish robes. Can't touch this. Who was this bell-ringing brotherhood? So hard, makes me say, oh my Lord. With their godliness and their great hair, these holy Joes were alone to themselves.
I think I want to be an alto boy.
Me too.
Fantastic. He's just fun. He's fabulous.
A little boy.
Yeah.
And his friend Porrick's really good as well.
How long did that take to develop from making the short to?
Not very long. Again, depends on who you're working with. Chris O'Dowd, obviously, through this, his Hollywood career was growing. So Moon Boy happened quite quickly because we were on quite a tight schedule driven by Chris, which is no bad thing actually. Sometimes you've got a momentum that was growing. The key thing really was casting Martin, which was great. It was a proper eureka moment when we'd found, because it's a pair, it's him and his best friend. We found one. In fact, they'd read for the wrong parts. We found one, finding the other, getting them to read together. It worked. The chemistry worked. It was really properly exciting. And once we got that, we sort of knew we had a show. I had total confidence in Chris O'Dowd working with his old mate, Nick Vincent Murphy. They know funny. I don't need to tell them what's funny. They know funny. And also, I think the nostalgia element to Moon Boy is it works for, you just get that great thing of people my age will enjoy something childhood from the 80s. And then you've got all experience that every kid's still going through, it doesn't matter when it's set. So I love that element of it as well. And then Irish, talk about what's fresh, what's surprising, what's new, what we haven't seen for a while. We've got lots of family comedy. What's the twist here? Set it in Ireland, and also the big thing was the imaginary friend. So Chris O'Dowd had played Santa in his small short film, The Little Cracker, and we said, Chris, you've got to be in it. So he came up with this imaginary friend, which is that thing we talked about, that kind of MacGuffin. What's the thing that will stand out? If it was Miranda talking to camera, For Moon Boy, I think it is The Imaginary Friend, something that just gives you a little bit of a different lens on very relatable family life. And it just gives you lots of fun to play, and then it gives you loads of surreal elements. So if you've seen the show, you can go anywhere once you've got an imaginary friend, which was great, great fun. But I'm a big old sucker for a big-hearted show, and actually deep down Moon Boy's a lot of love in it, a lot of heart. So having the two, sort of attention and release in comedy, is something that I love. I think they balance that extremely well. I'm very fond of it. And it really properly grew out of something that we came up with at Sky, which was really satisfying as a commissioner to see something through.
Can I ask, do you think a lot of the kind of the more general rules we've been talking about that apply to comedy, do you think they also apply similarly to short form comedy? Do you think it's the same rules?
Yeah, I do actually. I think I did a short film myself last year, and it was very interesting that all the same rules apply. You just, instead of a novel you're writing, it's one chapter. But I think it's story structure. You guys will be better at this stuff than me. But just characters that we get to know, fall in love with in the first couple of minutes. You just have much shorter time to do all these things. But short films, brilliant way of honing those skills. It's all the same. I think it doesn't have to be this, but if your character goes through some transformation, you'll have that in an episode, a half-hour episode as well in sitcom. Some things are harder to do. I'm just trying to think of, I really like the half-hour form for a sitcom because you have a bit of more time to get to know characters. There's a sort of rhythm to who are they, enjoy what they're doing, see what this is very basic stuff, but see what their goal is, see how they're failing to reach it, enjoy the disaster on the way. Usually everything's okay and it's reset. So that 30-minute is really good for that. A little bit harder in a short film, but I just think now grab any chance to not. It's not even practicing. I think short films are great in their own right. And Little Crackers really were short films, and a lot of them went into film festivals after that. Shot on film, some of them I think. We did 36 of them in the end, and we managed to get a lot of those stars directing for the first time. Victoria Wood had never directed before, and Kathy Burke, I think, directed hers. But it was great for that. We saw these sort of huge stars that I'd been in awe of throughout all my life, going, thank you for giving me this chance to do something I've never been asked to do before. So it was great to be able to do that and slightly shift the way we worked. And an anthology. Wasn't going to one indie and telling them they had the whole lot. We worked with, I think about 15 different companies on that one title. So our anthologies, they're a pain in the arse for rights, but as a way of attracting talent to a broadcast that was trying to make its mark, when the BBC has the lion's share of the talent, they work very well.
Yeah, it's a strong idea, and it really helped kind of give creative freedom to the performers.
Yeah.
Any other questions at this point? This gentleman here on the fourth row.
Hi. Thank you. I really like your show. I was a TV director in China, and we find that audience rates reflect that in China, more and more audience like to see the comedy shows without script. We noticed there are two TV programs in Europe. One is Thanks God You Are Here. Another one is Shiloh Street. They tried, or they pretend to be without script.
Do you mean improvised?
Improvised, sorry.
Do you mean that they've got a rough brief of what they're doing, but the words they are saying?
Yes. So I just wonder, is there any chance to combine reality shows and comedy together, or is that possible to find ways to pretend the shows without script?
So like a comedy made in Chelsea, is that what you mean?
Sorry.
So,
yes.
Well, Made in Chelsea actually is very scripted, and well, again, people know more about it than I, but it's a very produced show, so it's possibly not what you're talking about. But a reality show that is improvised, is that what you mean?
I think Thank God You're Here is that Australian format, isn't it? That
Yes.
that's the one you mean. It's an improvised format where somebody walks in and it starts Thank God You're Here. ITV made it.
Okay.
For a short series.
So Tom Davis's show just been out?
Yes.
I can't remember.
Murder in Successful.
Murder in Successful might be closest to that. So there's a sort of construct. There's a policeman. There's a crime that's happened, but the guest star of the week joins, and they don't know what's going to happen that week. So we are witnessing something for the first time. I mean, I think mess around with genre as much as you can. I mean, what's funny? Funny's funny. I think they're tough, and I think it's hit and miss. And hit and miss is tricky in TV because everything costs a lot of money. But Outnumbered had a certain amount of improvisation because they'd record the kids first, and then they'd work out the adults' lines, they'd reverse onto the parents, they'd fill in the blanks because they wouldn't know quite what the kid would say or what gold would happen that day. So, you know, maybe there's a grown-up way of doing that. Funny's funny, so no rules. The thing about an idea like that, you'd have to show it's working. You'd have to shoot your own taster tape, I think. It's a difficult one to describe.
And I think it has to have a kind of clear set of rules about it. One of the reasons we often talked about on Just a Minute it worked is because actually Just a Minute is a comedy improvised show on Radio 4, and it just had 3 simple rules, but actually at the pilot stage there were about 12, and they just got slowly whittled away until this simple construct was left behind. Any other questions? The gentleman at the back in the black t-shirt.
Hello. So practically, what can a writer or a producer do to get their script or show in front of one of you? And what is Sky Comedy looking for at the moment?
So if you've got a script and it's ready, the key thing is to make sure your producer is known to the broadcaster. That is the tricky and most irritating bit of the process, I think. But you can't, I'm afraid there's no other way around it. Just because commissioners they always have this pile of scripts. And I know it's deeply frustrating to go, well, a good idea should just miraculously shine above all scripts. You're dealing with a human being who's going to be a bit bogged down by stuff. So it's making sure there's a moment, I mean, if it's a pitch, or in America there's a really formal way of doing this. Here we're not so formal. I think it's just about getting your script to be to the top of the pile. So your producer is really key. It's not the same in other countries, but in the UK it really is key. Their track record. If they don't quite have the shorthand with a commissioner, then they themselves possibly need an exec producer or someone else. So make sure, we talk about chains of sort of getting stuff made, get your links nice and strong, and make sure the producer you're talking to, or if you yourself are a producer, what do you need to work on in order to secure those relationships? If you're a new producer, you're forging relationships. What about relationships? I'm afraid it really is. And relationships are usually based on trust. If you haven't had an opportunity to show what you're good at, then it's harder to build up the trust. So it's sort of small connections wherever possible. I mean, as a commissioner, you're really reliant, I'm afraid, still on quite big independent companies out there in comedy. And there are specialists. It's a very specialised area. And it's broadcast now, brilliant. Green light section in broadcast will tell you everything that's been commissioned. Do your homework on who's getting the most commissions, what sorts of shows are they making. Do you like their shows? If you don't like their shows, do not go to that company. It's the first meeting you'll have is you'll need to flatter them about how much you like their shows. Don't lie. Really don't lie. I think it's really important for comedy. If you've got your taste, align yourself with other people who share your taste. Sky Comedy. So I have just left Sky. I'm a charlatan, but I can talk about Sky and the BBC, which is quite good. But I'm there till Christmas. John Montague, you met earlier, he's acting head of comedy. Anyway, but I know roughly what they're looking for still, which won't have changed too much. Sky One, watch Sky One, see what's already on there. Modern Family is their big show that they required, always looking for another pre-Watershed show. They're not easy to find. Trolleyed, which we'll show in a minute, is one that's really, really worked well. Not everything has to be the long-running show like Trolleyed, but boy, does it help if it feels it's got a precinct or a world that resets itself. As soon as you see that, you go, okay, volume, it's got miles to go. Moon Boy was a trickier show. It's a coming-of-age story, so it's not going to go on forever. By the time he's 15, you sort of know it's over. We still commissioned it. You don't say no to it, but it's worth bearing in mind. There's post-Watershed Sky One, but it's still got to carry that audience through. So I never say sort of, and then let rip, because it's post-Watershed. It's Sky One. It's the whole household is watching, or so you hope they're watching. So Sky is Sky One, then Sky Atlantic and Sky Arts, all doing comedy, which is great. Sky Atlantic, you've got a flavour of it with Hunderby. I think under Zy Bennett, who came from the BBC Three, he's really after very ambitious, transatlantic, big scale, really almost drama-led with either a comic conceit or a comic character at the heart of it, but pulling you through a big, chunky story. I think You, Me and the Apocalypse, even though I know that's on Sky One, but that's a helpful show. Big scale, he's not afraid of an ambitious big idea. In fact, a lot of the shows we're looking at were film scripts we're converting to series. Then Sky Arts, we love Sky Arts. We just experiment with lots of different things. We get major talent. We've got Daniel Radcliffe and John Hamm to unite on A Young Doctor's Notebook. So a very strange, different idea set in Russia, but you've got the man from Mad Men and Potter joining forces in a show on Sky Arts. It's sort of those amazing moments where you get major talent doing brand new things. BBC Four is similar, Sky Arts. You have to get either a major idea at the heart of it or a major piece of talent, possibly doing things that you've never seen them do before. And then that's the kind of magic formula for a Sky Arts show. But they're great. They're great for new talent in the writing and the directing because they're only half hour. So we're doing quite a lot of new things with new indies as well. That's the place for the newer indies to pitch for. So that's Sky.
One thing I would add to that is I think sometimes when people are a newly emerging writer or producer, they have this one project that's very precious to them, and they work on that and they sit on that for a long time. Start developing other things. Don't wait to get your heart broken, as often can happen on that project. Start developing smaller things as well. So whether if you're a writer, start writing sketches as well as sitcom. And if you're a producer, start making your own shorts as well as waiting for that big opportunity, I'd say is key.
Absolutely right. Simeon Goulden, who wrote Spy for us with Robert Lindsay and Darren Boyd. He was a lawyer. He jacked in his very nice, proper career and madly became a comedy writer. His first thing he wrote, what does he know about? He wrote a comedy about the legal world. It was his baby. It didn't get made, but he didn't give up there, and he learnt. He hadn't done had no experience on other TV shows, so he worked on Armstrong and Miller. I think another show, can't remember. Anyway, I think the Hat Trick stable. He sort of worked on a few of their shows, and then he came up with Spy. He hadn't been commissioned to do a half hour before, but he was really super smart, and he got 2 series out of it. So. Is an example of a new writer.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask Lucy what next and take one final question, and then we'll draw it to a close. So where do you go on to after
Got another clip of Trolleyed?
We have, but I think we're short on time. So I think... Yes, we'll show Trolleyed. Okay.
In general, the layout is the same. Oh, Margaret, look who's back with us.
Hiya, Katie, love. How were your weekend? You do know I've been gone a lot longer than that, don't you?
Well, was it a bank holiday? Oh, honestly, I can't keep track of them these days.
No, Margaret, I moved to Newquay.
Well, for a weekend? You daft apeth. You should have just got a B&B.
Well, there you go. It's literally as if you've never been away. Oh!
No, it's totally my fault. I'll go get someone to clean it up.
Allow me.
No, look at you, you're covered.
Oh, listen, don't worry about me. It's you that...
Oh, I'm so sorry. Have you got a nosebleed? You should really tip your head forward if you've got a nosebleed. Or is it backwards? Oh, I can't remember.
No, actually, I'm all right. No nosebleed.
I've got a hanky if you want one. No, yes.
How very kind of you. Thank you, madam.
You got yogurt on your nose.
Have I? I hadn't noticed.
Calling to aisle 4 for a spillage. That's calling to aisle 4 for a spillage, please.
I guess they're talking about us. I better go and pay for this.
No, please. This one's on me. I am the manager after all.
Oh, you're the manager, are you?
Oh, yes.
Well, good to meet you, Gavin, the manager. Guess I'll be seeing you around.
Okay, be careful.
I've got it. I've totally got it. Totally got it. And I am sorry. Again.
This is a customer announcement.
Again, another fabulously cast show.
Yeah, amazing cast. Gosh, so lucky. Trolley just really, I know we're running out of time, but it's an interesting one. Asher Taller, who runs Rough Cut, was a producer I've known, known for the last 15 years. And coming to Sky and just saying, we really, really need a big show. And Ash and I have worked on things that haven't been great successes, but actually that's almost where we forged our best sort of working relationship through things that didn't work. So there's, comedy is ups and downs, but every time you do something, you are really making your relationship stronger. So trust, really trusted Ash. Ash brought in the right people. That's really important to say. Brought in really skills from the drama world that weren't shy of building a life-scale supermarket, which they did in Bristol. Absolutely bloody enormous. The first time I went around it, I could not believe it. It was 8 aisles. It was huge. But if you're going to set your show in a supermarket, you've got to look like you're in a proper supermarket. So ambition, but it was sort of placing ambition in the hands of the experts. And that's what we did at the beginning of that Sky journey 6 years ago. And trolleyed brilliantly in its 5th series now. And I actually think possibly the best series ever now with wonderful Sarah Parish. I love that scene, that's great.
Fabulous. What next for you, Lucy, now? What's
So,
after
yeah.
commissioning?
So I directed a short film last year. I've done my career back to front, but I really wanted to write something. So I wrote and directed a film last year. And it's when that sort of hobby thing suddenly got bigger and the day job, I just felt I couldn't kind of keep both. So something had to give. So I thought, time to hand over a brilliant job of commissioning comedy to someone else. And I'm currently directing 2 things. And we'll see what happens next. But I'm really, really enjoying it. I guess slightly moving from that midwife thing to creating stuff. So yeah, back to front career. There you go.
Fantastic.
No rules.
Any final questions before we wrap up? The lady here in the front.
Hiya. Being a woman who wants to go into TV, have you found any challenges and how have you overcome them, being quite a successful female in a male-dominated industry?
Good question. I get to talk a lot about being a woman in this industry. It definitely has changed. When I came in, I went to secretarial college. I mean, it was really kind of basic thing of, as a girl, you should learn to type. So because I was a woman, I did quite a kind of traditional route that got me my job at the BBC. I sort of went through that way of being able to type scripts fast. It was very functional. It was then a bit of time before it was like, oh yeah, I can read a script and make some judgments about it. BBC was a fantastic place because I wanted to have children. I won't go into all the details, guys, but I had 2 kids while I had a big role, and it was wonderful to be able to. Cheryl Taylor, who's fantastic, now runs children's, was sort of my pal, and we had sort of our families when she had a kid, and we sort of planned it in a way that we could run the ship but take a little bit of time off so that we didn't wake up age 45 and go, shit, I forgot to have kids. So I'm very glad I do have kids now. And that is bloody hard in the TV industry to juggle all of that. And I was really grateful to be working in commissioning and a broadcaster that really looked after me very, very well. I felt very secure. And I suppose I sort of needed to lay all those foundations almost to leave now, you know, at this stage of my life. Everything's okay, you know, I've had all those elements of one's life, which no one talks about. They're bloody important as a woman, I can assure you. They're all running okay, so now I'm gonna slightly run away to the circus and have some fun. But have I answered your question? Very male world in comedy. I think actually it helped that I could go in and gently point out that that might need a bit of work where that didn't, and I wasn't a sort of strong, dominant force in the room going, I think it should be done this way. I learnt to be a good diplomat and to articulate notes very, very early on. Is that a female thing? I have no idea. But I suppose in a kind of the chemistry of working, talked about partnerships, producer, director, co-writers, it sort of fitted, yin-yang, whatever you want to call it. It worked really well. Yeah, I don't know, I haven't quite put my finger on it, but I think it possibly helped being a woman in a male world, weirdly, for me.
Fantastic, thank you. That was really well put. Thank you all so much for bearing with us today, and we look forward to chatting to you a little bit more in the over drinks in the Blue Room. Is that right? It's Blue Room. And please join me in thanking Lucy Lumsden for sharing her life experience so articulately. Thank you.